Well, firstly, thanks everyone for coming to this MardiGrass and these talks. The Friday afternoon talks are proving very popular, and just really glad that we get such good speakers from all over to come and pass on their information, their knowledge. So my talk will be, I suppose, more Australian-based, and talking about the influence that I've seen over the years of the state police forces, I suppose, primarily, and businesses attached to those. And there's obviously there's a money trail behind cannabis prohibition. And people have worked out how to make money from it and where to lobby through to get what they want. I suppose it's important to note, a lot of the things that the last speaker spoke about, Abe, the social experiment that he described, what's going on in Colorado, but a lot of the positive aspects and unintended positive consequences of liberalising cannabis and allowing some cannabis law reforms. As opposed to put my talk in context is to put what Abe was saying in context, in that at a federal level, it's illegal. And I believe also in places like Colorado and right back in California in 1998, I think, where they got the first medical cannabis regime going. All of these were citizens-initiated referendums, which is something allowed under the US Constitution. And all those, there's people in the state there who get a petition together and get a referendum question up at an election. What's really interesting to note is all those state governments ran no campaigns. They didn't want the people to vote yes. I mean, they especially in the early days in California, the federal government was giving a lot of money to these state governments to run no campaigns. So they went to the elections, the people voted yes, and they were forced to introduce these, what I was describing, these half laws, these grey areas, something where the government couldn't really get involved because you still need a federal approval. So that's the same going on all over the world. In Canada is a similar situation. Here in Australia, we're in that. So most of the people in the world do not have access to medical cannabis or even definitely not a regulated recreational market. It's all in the black market. So 95% of the cannabis or even more in the world is grown under black market and sold under black market situations. So it's a worldwide thing. Here in Australia, our governments are bound by those UN drug charters and all that entails is basically no country can really do anything with cannabis, especially at a federal level when we're talking about politics and governments and so forth. So here in Australia, the influence of police, I suppose, really came up for me. It comes up a lot, but it's hard to think about where it first came up. But definitely there was always police interference when you try and talk to. This is state police I'm talking about. We have to, in Australia, we've got federal police, state police. The states are all different, but they generally sing the same tune. The feds keep, as far as I've seen, generally keep out of cannabis law reform. That's not really their thing. And nowadays it's more obviously centred on terrorism and homeland security type affairs. So at the state level, I suppose I should talk about, more recently, the hemp seed food debate. Now, just to be clear, hemp seed, we're Australia and New Zealand are the only two countries not allowed to have hemp seed food, to eat it. The rest of the world does. Most of the world never stopped. The Western countries did, but over the past 15 or 20 years, Western countries or allied countries took up cannabis or hemp seed food consumption. We're still lingering behind. And it was purely, it's been going on for about 6 or 7 years now, and it's purely on the basis that police around the country have made submissions that allowing hemp seed consumption in Australia would interfere with saliva testing. So another thing to understand here, Australia's the only country doing saliva testing. Definitely this random roadside thing. It's not effective. the rest of the world doesn't do it because they're unreliable. The devices are unreliable. The method is not scientifically proven. It's not scientifically based, and it's quite extraordinary on the face of it that Australia is using these devices. Our road tolls are going up. They're obviously not effective, and it unfairly targets cannabis. But it was interesting watching. I did a freedom of information search and received hundreds of documents, and a lot of those were to and from New South Wales Police, where they made outlandish claims such as in other countries people are being saliva tested and they're coming up positive for cannabis, and the people are saying that they just had some hemp seed food. Look, just made up. I mean, there's no other country using these devices, and this situation hasn't happened. And in fact, when police were asked to substantiate those claims, they didn't. They couldn't. It was all made up. And there was a few other things. West Australian Police talked about the residual CBD content. I mean, if we all understand low THC cannabis is what is allowed to be grown and used for food overseas. CBD is a very minor component and has preliminary shown to not have any psychoactive effect. But yeah, Western Australian Police put it out there. We've got to do we should look into the psychoactive effects of minute traces of CBD in hemp seed food. So it was quite interesting watching South Australia Police did other things and made similar submissions. So at that level, we know, and it has been reported a bit. There's been a couple of landline episodes and even a few media reports. But I really don't want to underestimate the influence of police. Earlier in the year, I spoke to a minister in New South Wales, Minister for DPI, Minister Blair Nile, and he's the most junior minister. And when it came to the holdback in the hemp industry, he basically said, Troy Grant is my boss, he's the police minister, he's deputy premier, he's head of the National Party, and the government believes that saliva testing is their answer to ice. So, I mean, we then explained that, look, ice goes through your body a lot quicker than cannabis. Cannabis is a bunch of agents that our body wants. They're fat soluble, our body takes them in and metabolises them slowly and releases them slowly. Ice, other drugs are pure poison to our system, and your body's trying to get rid of it. And so, whether it's a synthetic drug or ice or other drugs like that, your body expels them a lot quicker, and people will work that out. We in fact, in the parliamentary briefings, we did make that warning back in 2006 to the New South Wales government, and it was published in their parliamentary briefings that this strategy could alter drug use trends for the worse. So, when we're looking at governments and even police not taking any notice of what we're saying from the Hemp Party and other people, even on this issue alone, which touches on a lot of other issues, it sort of reinforces the influence that police are having on cannabis law reform in Australia. It was, and again, we're only talking about serving members. We had Mike Palmer, who was the Australian Federal Police Commissioner for quite a few years, and prior to that he was on a UN council, and prior to that he was a police commissioner of NT Police Force. It was interesting, not long after he resigned from the job as Chief Police Commissioner of Australian Federal Police, he was openly talked about the mistakes surrounding cannabis law, about cannabis prohibition, and if it was up to him, medical and other forms and other uses of cannabis would be allowed. And we find that, we actually do see that a lot. There's even a group, and they have an Australian arm called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And this is, you're hearing firsthand from ex-police, ex-drug squad cops, just the utter farce that was the prohibition, policing drug prohibition, especially when it related to cannabis. And so, police do know. There was actually a visitor from the US, one of the president of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and he was interviewed by Western Australian Police, and that interview was published in the Police Journal over there. the uproar that created, even for that magazine and all the editors, and it really didn't go down well. And there was an ex-cop just saying the truth, and obviously the interviewer was taking that on board, could understand what this guy was saying, and you know, it really does provide, you know, the basis of argument for ending prohibition when we really delve into how police are spending all that enforcement money. Does it really make a difference? Is it any better, with the pros and cons? And again, getting back to what Abe was talking about, and our last speaker from the US, in Colorado, where they have tried this as a social experiment. The social impacts are far out, you know, the negative, positive consequences far outweigh any, you know, negative even perceptions of what could happen under you know, if we removed cannabis prohibition. I make a lot of analogies with alcohol prohibition in the US. Now, obviously, none of us are old enough to remember or live through that, but a period between, I think it was something like 1910 to 1923, they had the alcohol prohibition, where it was kind of decriminalised. It was supposed to be just eliminated. No one was going to be drinking alcohol, or basically framed as cannabis prohibition is that, you know, it's going to be eliminated from the face of the earth. No one's going to use it. No country is allowed to fully integrate or let it be legal. And that was the same that was proposed for alcohol. Within a very short time, the laws changed. It wasn't illegal to drink it or to consume it, but it was illegal to manufacture and distribute it. We just saw, again, the stories we hear of what went there, what was happening during that time with the corruption. It seemed like alcohol prohibition had corrupted every part of civilised life, right down to police, governments, local councils, state governments. And yet, you know, right to the very end, there was the police force saying, look, give us more money and we can end this, you know, we can really bring about alcohol prohibition. And that's what police are doing here in Australia, is, you know, rather than turn around and be open and honest about the mistake. It's been a mistake, it's not working, we're going backwards, especially on cannabis. We should be allowing it for hemp seed food, we should be allowing medical cannabis, we should you know, decriminalise, regulate and tax cannabis for social and recreational use. Rather than police saying that, they want more money for enforcement. They're hoodwinking the government, and the governments are playing along. I mean, as I said, it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not like New South Wales Police will be the first police force in the world to suddenly say, hey, we're going to make a stand and we're going to force our state government to force the federal government to change cannabis laws. And while we're at it, we can actually say that about all this talk by, you know, New South Wales and Tasmania and Victoria that they're legalising medical cannabis. No way. There's no way any Australian state will be the first state of any country in the world to willingly introduce a meaningful medical cannabis regime. You know, obviously we're not seeing that in Canada. We're not in Canada, but in the US, as Abe was saying. A lot of that growing and dispensing of cannabis, it's unregulated, it's untested. We've got no idea what it is. It's certainly not, you know. I mean, again, they're working within the framework that they're allowed to. In Australia, we don't have citizens-initiated referendums. We don't have, like in Canada, a Charter of Rights that, as it happened in 2002, where after a series of court cases and appeals, there was a court ruling in the High Court in favour of medical cannabis, and the High Court ordered, it had the power under the Charter of Rights to order the government to introduce a medical cannabis regime. But in no way is that a meaningful one. When we're talking about medical cannabis and the government, you know, the government's always going to talk about the TGA and other pharmaceuticals, the testing and that has to go on. We're not seeing that out of Canada. We're not seeing clinical trials out of many countries at all, really. You know, minute trials out of Israel and you know, long-winded ones based out of Britain with a company, GW Pharmaceuticals. So, you know, while we have on the one hand police influencing progress, especially on cannabis law reform, we also are bound in the context of a worldwide ban, a worldwide stranglehold on the use of cannabis, whether it's for medical purposes or recreational purposes. I should just point out, in the UN drug charters, it's an article specifically saying that these drug charters do not apply to hemp, a low THC cannabis grown for fibre or seed, and yet here we are, Australia being the last of the Western countries to still be. Our federal government maintains that, that doesn't exist, that allowing hemp seed consumption in Australia would be in contravention of UN drug charters. I mean, it's just that blind, it's irrational. A lot of this is irrational, so when I'm talking, I might even appear to be contradicting myself, especially what's happening in the real world, but there is some really irrational stuff going on around cannabis and the stranglehold, the UN embargo, basically on the use of cannabis for medical and scientific research even. So, the influence that Australian police exert is really an extension of, what every police force basically around the world is being paid to do, is make sure that, cannabis doesn't get up. Health departments are bound at the same level, I suppose, and even more so by extension through, the AMA and all its all the doctors that are members of the AMA, or the AMA, there are different associations. Ultimately, you still have the medical insurer, the insurers who insure the medical practitioner at the coalface, and if that practitioner goes and suggests that you use cannabis or anything like that, there's no insurance there. If something does happen to that patient, he's not covered, and so you find a lot of doctors that won't step out of that and definitely will avoid that. And it's interesting, in the US and Canada, and even in Israel, it's reported, there hasn't been an embrace of medical cannabis. It's not a wholehearted embrace of the use of cannabis for full, the kind of medical use that we'd expect, especially when we're talking about the government. So, again, coming back to putting the hemp party hat on all the time, when we're talking about changing laws, we have to have laws that fit in with the international, our international obligations, and that's what every country is using as an excuse. So, it's just that extension from the UN to our federal governments, to our state governments, to our state police forces, who are then exerting that. And there's chains all through it, and it's through our health departments as well, through our state and federal health departments, where they all kind of sing the same tune. So, but as I said, the most money being spent on law enforcement around cannabis, around Australia, around the whole world, in New South Wales, and so they do get a lot of a say, and a lot of influence is exerted by, it's almost administrative bullying by police when you have half a dozen state government ministries lined up, say with hemp seed food or medical. You've got the police, you've got your health departments, you've got there'd probably be the DPI department. So when you have trade and industry department, when you have all these departments lined up, and they're all offering submissions on the same question being put, what I've found is that the police influence outweighs everyone's, and in fact to an extent where other governments just won't offer a positive opinion. And in fact, in New South Wales, we had our DPI department comment their first line of their submission to whether Australia and whether we should allow hemp seed food consumption. The DPI department, their first line was, it's obvious this draft has been written to the negative, and they finished off with something like, there's nothing we can add of value to this. So, we had a whole industry hanging back, waiting for the DPI to represent them. DPI was in possession of a lot of information, a lot of industry input, and that just wasn't even used because police had written a draft to the negative, and that was it. So, make no mistake, police are a big influence, especially at that kind of level, at a state and federal level, around any kind of talk on medical or recreational, or even obviously hemp seed food, at that kind of cannabis law reform in general. But yeah, they are part of it. You have health departments and other departments, cabinet officers of different various state ministries, and then you've got your federal departments as well. And like I said, there's no real proof that federal police have been much involved, but definitely at a state level, all around Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, Western Australia Police, definitely there is an extreme influence. And look, the cops we're seeing on the street, these guys have got no idea. They can be just like me and you, and where we can talk, and I often do talk quite openly with police, and they say, we can't help you at this kind of level, we have no idea. It all comes back to, the rabbit warren of different departments and secretariats within a government department, especially when we're talking about police. You've got your policy division, your policy advice division, and then you've got your lobbyists, obviously. And look, lobbying is fairly hard, and it's entrenched. And so whether you're a health lobbyist or a lobbyist for the private prison gardens or from police police superannuation funds, your voice gets heard when you're at that level. And so, yeah, I'm done. I might even take some questions now. I think I've spoken enough. But I suppose I should just finish off on a positive note that, look, police, again, on the ground, they do realise if they really wanted to shut a town like Nimbin down, they could. Nimbin probably represents, 5 or 6 suburbs in most big cities in terms of cannabis use. We're kind of small scale. Not everyone in Nimbin smokes. In fact, most don't. So they'll give you some idea. So, we're just part of it, and the police are in the same boat. But it's important to keep the fight up. If the governments and those lobbyists don't hear these calls and the different angles that we find to attack them, they will just be complacent. And I think we're seeing, the reaction even when premiers are saying that they've legalised medical cannabis in their state. I can tell you it's not true, but at least they're saying stuff, and we take that as a great way of reinforcing that we are right, and we should just keep that pressure up. So yeah, any questions?
Yeah, Martin from NIMFM. Andrew, can you tell a little bit about the Hemp Party, the political force of it, and how the situation is developing some kind of political change?
Oh, well, obviously we're a micro party, and the last deal done between the Greens and the federal government to eliminate the group voting ticket has impacted us greatly. So we're kind of counting our last throw at a chance of ever getting anyone elected at federal politics or federal level is the call of a double dissolution election. We'll be running hard for that. I suppose what the Hemp Embassy the Hemp Party has been trying to do is try and get onto the ground the information that I'm just passing on. That in spite of what governments might say and do and make media releases and big announcements, they're all quite hollow. We've been at this for 30 odd years. We really do know the international context of this. We know where the UN drug charters are letting us down, or what reinforces the international block on cannabis. So in terms of the Hemp Party, we'll be running in probably not all states this at the upcoming election, but we'll definitely run a pretty good campaign in probably South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, and we could still have a chance over in Western Australia, but we're looking at amalgamating and running double tickets with other parties as well, which is going to help the micro parties. And if we do get help from people who used to help the Greens, we'll be able to get our message out with the help of others to a lot of polling booths around Australia. So we'll still keep fighting, and even as the federal issues sort of may die down for us, we'll probably start at the grassroots level and look at local government and work our way up to state. Yep.
Hi, Andrew. Hi. I was wondering about Portugal. They're a country that is decriminalised, I think, and all drugs. So what's this in relation to the UN saying, you said that the UN couldn't, or countries couldn't go against the UN Convention.
Yeah.
What about Portugal?
Portugal is really interesting, and I've only heard from one guy, but I got him to explain it twice. So, look, what Portugal is doing is absolutely in line with what the UN Drug Convention is saying, because the second part of what Portugal is talking about and especially when we're talking about hundreds of millions of new money going into rehabilitation. So we've had a look at that. But here's a story from a guy on the street in Portugal, a smoker. He says, before, you know, the police would turn a blind eye and this and that, he said, but now we wanted to do it by the rules. You could be theoretically walking down the street in Portugal with 10 grams of pot in your pocket. You could get picked up by the cops. They could take you to jail overnight, take your cannabis. In the morning, you'll be in rehab, and they're going to help you get off that wicked weed. And if you get a couple more of them, you end up fined and in jail anyway. So we want to know more exactly about what's happening in Portugal. When we do have it, you know, intricately have a look at it and compare what they're talking about, that kind of decriminalisation, it puts you back into that alcohol prohibition, where the consumption, you know, the consumers are protected to an extent, but the black market now has all these safe customers, and we come into that problem of black markets getting bigger and bigger. If police do start going after, you know, people who are producing and manufacturing cannabis and so forth, it's quite likely that the charges will be heavier. And like with a lot of these things, they always pick up the little guys. You know, the big black market, the, you know, corruption. You've got to add all that into it. I mean, we're almost looking at cannabis prohibition with these blinkers on. Prohibition also involves corruption. Alcohol prohibition really proved that, and we seem to forget and not want to talk about the corruption that spread its tentacles through every government department. And we had our Al Capones who lived the high life and are running other countries, and Cuba, all these things, all over alcohol prohibition. So, you know, I really want to know more about Portugal. If anything, that's my views on it have come from one first-hand thing, and then I extrapolate from what I would imagine is going on over there, and on the face of it, yeah, it looks like the black market has just gained a bunch of really safe consumers. Yeah.
We have time for one more question here.
Yep.
Good afternoon. My question, I was wondering what arguments or what strategies can appeal to the more conservative elements of the police force to persuade them that their current strategy is not the right strategy, if in the sense they're the biggest roadblock?
Yeah, look, again, I was trying to explain, police are kind of the face of the roadblocks, but there's also other government departments trying to appeal to the conservative forces like Scipione and other people like that at the hierarchy of New South Wales Police specifically. It's almost impossible. There's no way that they're going to say, yeah, you know what, you're right. You know, yeah, we should listen to those hippies. You know, they were right. So, what I'll come back again to alcohol prohibition and how that was brought about, how that came to an end, and who was credited with bringing about that change in the US. It was a lady called Pauline Morton Sabine. She was the first lady to appear on the front cover of Time magazine and credited with bringing about the end of alcohol prohibition. This was a very conservative lady, from a rich family who fully supported alcohol prohibition. But what she did, she went on tours and she said, yes, I was wrong. I used to think that prohibition was right, but now I've seen and I was able to articulate the negative consequences of alcohol prohibition and what she's seeing on the ground.
Okay, sorry, we're just going to stop the questions now. I'm really sorry, we've got so much happening. You're very welcome to speak to Andrew afterwards.
All
sorry,
right, I'll come and see you.
It'll just keep going. Sorry, mate.
Okay, well,
thank you
thanks,
very
everyone.
much,
Yeah.
Andrew. It's awesome.
And enjoy MardiGrass. Hemp, hemp, hooray.
Woo!